All right, hello there, Key Stage 3. It's Mrs. Gotham here today, making a brief cameo appearance on the Term 6 work, as Mr. Palmer is really busy this week teaching Year 10 and Year 12 in school. I'm sure he's getting on really well there. So I've got the pleasure of taking you through lesson number 4 for the Term 6 work, all about discussing writer's aims based on the story Lamb to the Slaughter. I hope you've been enjoying this scheme of learning, this unit so far. Today's lesson is going to very much build on last week's lesson where you were writing about the writer's aims, Roald Dahl's aims in Lamb to the Slaughter. But today, rather than talking about the characters and how they're presented, we're going to be talking about the themes of the story. I'll explain a little bit about that later. So there's going to be 3 parts to today's video. Part 1, we're going to be annotating a waggle and obviously doing your vocabulary words also. Just a reminder, this work is for the week beginning Monday the 6th of July. Okay, so a reminder just to start off of a few things that you should know well by now. First of all, our big question for this unit, which is how do writers create memorable characters and situations? And you've been looking at 3 learning path skills. Skill 1, which is all about the writer's aims, what messages are they trying to give us in the text. Skill 5, which is about your reading skills, how well do you understand something you've read. And skill 3, which is vocabulary, understanding words that the writer has chosen and used and their reasons why. If you are in Year 7 and you would like a reminder of what those skills look like for your learning path, you're welcome to pause the video here and have a read. And if you are in Year 8 and you would like a reminder of your learning path skills that we're working on at the moment, then you can pause the video now and have a read. Wonderful. Okay, so this lesson today is going to talk about writer's aims and vocabulary. Just as you did last week, we're going to be thinking about writing analytical paragraphs to build on those skills. Let's start off with our vocabulary. So a quick reminder, you should be used to this by now, that we're looking at our vocabulary in a slightly different format now, especially for Year 8, where we're looking at all the different versions of a word available in the different NAVA classes. And the noun will be shown first, and whichever is first in the NAVA order if there is no noun. And there is a reminder of what NAVA stands like if you want to pause and remind yourself. Okay, so again, you should be getting used to this by now, but a quick reminder of what we're doing with each vocab slide. So on the first slide for the word, you're writing down all of the classes of the word. So if it has a noun, an adjective, and a verb, you're writing down all of them, making sure you're careful to check the spelling. And I will be asking you to repeat the words aloud after I say them, so a nice bit of embarrassment there for you if you're in the room with someone else. Also make sure you write down the definition. That's really important so that you have a reminder of what the word means. And if that can be in your own words if possible, that would be fantastic. And then the second slide, you are writing down your own example sentence using the word, so you don't have to write down my example, you are just answering the question with your sentence. So today's first word is anxiety. So you can say it down here, anxiety, anxiety. So say that after me now, anxiety. So it's the feeling of being very, very worried. And you might have heard of the adjective and the adverb form. So the adjective, we've got anxious. So if you are describing someone with anxiety, you would say that they are very anxious. And then you've also got an adverb, anxiously. So that would be how they maybe did something to show that they were worried. There's no verb for the noun anxiety. So pause the video now and remember that you're writing down each different form of the word and also what it means. Okay, lovely guys, on to the next slide then. So here is my example sentence. Going into the dusty shed with all the spiders filled him with anxiety. So I don't know if anyone out there has got a spider allergy, but certainly I know that I get quite worried when I'm surrounded by lots and lots of spiders. So your job is to think about what other situations fill you with anxiety. So have a think, what might make you feel really worried? And then you're going to write your sentence using the sentence starter if you want. I would be filled with anxiety if I... because... And a bit of a challenge for you here, if you want to stretch yourself, can you also use the adjective anxious and or the adverb anxiously in your answer somewhere? So pause the video now and you are writing your own sentence using the word anxiety to answer that question. Okay, thanks folks. Let's carry on then. We're going to go on to our second word. So our second word is the noun bewilderment. So we can see the pronunciation down here, bewilderment, bewilderment. So if you could say that after me, bewilderment. It means the state of being very confused when you're not really sure what to do. And there's lots of different versions of this. You can say the adjective bewildered to describe somebody. You can say the verb to bewilder, so that's when you deliberately make somebody confused. And you can also use the adverb bewilderingly, so if something is done in a particularly confusing way. So pause the video now, you're writing down each form of the word bewilderment and what it means, which is being very confused. Alright, KS3, so hopefully you have made some notes using the slide on the noun bewilderment. Hopefully you were not too bewildered about what you had to do there. Ha ha. So here is my example sentence. After I lost my map, I was left wandering through the streets in a state of complete bewilderment. Obviously a map would help you to find your way. Without it, you'd probably be quite confused. So your chance now to think of some other situations where you would feel bewilderment, confused and not sure what to do. And you can use the sentence starter, I would feel bewilderment if I... ... because ... And there's a little bit of a challenge here as well, which is can you use the adjective bewildered, the verb to bewilder, or the adverb bewilderingly somewhere in your answer as well, if you'd like to challenge yourself. So pause here then, folks, and you are answering this question with this sentence starter. Okay, so hopefully you have thought of a situation that would leave you feeling a sense of bewilderment. So we're going to move on then to explain what we're going to be doing in the rest of this week's lesson. As I said earlier, it's in 3 parts. So by the end of part 3 of today's lesson, you will have written at least an analytical paragraph about the theme of gender in Lamb to the Slaughter, and an analytical paragraph about the theme of deception in Lamb to the Slaughter. If you're not quite sure what those words mean, we are going to go through them, so don't worry too much at this stage. But when I say analytical paragraph, as Mr. Palmer explained last week, it's anything which looks at a writer's aims and what they're trying to do in a particular text. And you have already, from last week's lesson, looked at how to write analytical paragraphs, so hopefully that should be reasonably comfortable for you, and we're kind of building on that today. So you'll notice maybe in both of those questions I said what is meant by the theme. So some of you might not know what a theme is, so just so we're all clear, themes are the big ideas explored by the writer in a text. And when they're writing out these themes or big ideas, the writer will normally be giving us some kind of message, something they want us to learn when we read their text or believe at the end of reading their text. But they won't tell us these messages clearly. They will hint at them. And they'll hint at them through the plot and through the characters and through other things in the text. We have to kind of try and figure out what their message is as we're reading their particular text. Here's what a theme is, a big idea the writer explores and gives us a message about. So the first question we're going to look at today is, how does Roald Dahl present gender in the story Lamb to the Slaughter? So gender is a theme. It's a big idea which the writer is trying to give us some messages about. So when we're talking about gender, we generally in literature, in English, we're talking about the roles of men and women. So what different roles do men and women fulfill in society? And what do kind of writers think about those roles? Do they agree with the roles we typically give men and women, or do they disagree with them? So if we're thinking about Lamb to the Slaughter and the roles of men and women in that story, Mary, the wife, and Patrick, the husband, tend to hold very traditional roles within their marriage. And you could argue perhaps this is a bit outdated. We no longer really expect marriages to be like this, where the man has a lot of the control and the woman is kind of expected to do what the man wants them to do. So we might call this outdated, meaning that we don't tend to see this very much anymore. Some people still do choose to set up their marriages like this, but it's becoming less common. But it was very, very typical, probably in the 1950s and 60s and before, that this was what a marriage looked like. So what do we think then that Roald Dahl is trying to suggest about gender through this marriage of Mary and Patrick? That's what this question is really asking us to think about. Do we think that Roald Dahl agrees with these traditional roles, with the man in charge and the woman kind of not very equal? Or do we think that Dahl is kind of trying to criticise this idea within his text? So that's what this question is it was really asking you to think about. So I want you to go back now and get out your notes from lesson 2, which is where you were looking at lots of quotes and you were making notes on those quotes with Mr. Palmer. And I'd like you to think, as you look at those notes that you've got, are there any of those quotes which are about the roles of men and women, so to do with gender? If you could find 3, that would be fantastic. And then have a think about what they could possibly hint to us about the roles of men and women in the story. What is Dahl trying to say about men and women and how they are in marriages through the story? So pause now then, have a look at your lesson 2 notes, see if you can find some quotes which are all about men and women and gender. All right, so hopefully you have got a bit of an idea about some of the quotes you could use to talk about men and women and gender in the story. I've got some here, so see if any of the ones you found match mine. And like Mr. Palmer did last week, I've sorted them into the beginning, the middle and the end of the story. So from the beginning of the story, I've got Mary Maloney was waiting for her husband to come home from work. So why is this one about men and women and their roles? Well, it shows us that Mary is reliant on her husband to kind of lead her day. It shows that she wants to wait on him and therefore is kind of dropped everything until he is back so that she can sort of do what he wants her to do. So this is quite a traditional role here between Mary and Patrick. The wife is the one who is doing all the work in the house and the husband is kind of leading the household. Another quote which also kind of proves a similar idea is she took his coat and hung it in the closet, then she walked over and made the drinks. So again here we see the very traditional role of the husband and wife. Mary is expected to look after the house, to kind of wait on her husband, to do things for him, whereas Patrick doesn't do these things for himself. So again, we've got a very traditional view of men and women here. So then from the middle of the text, when things kind of start to get moving, we've got sit down, he said. So this is Patrick speaking here. This is him speaking to Mary. So he's very much giving her an order here, a demand. Notice he doesn't say please or thank you. So again, we've got husband very much in control in this quote. And then from after she murders Patrick, we've got the quote about Mary. She sat down before the mirror, tidied her hair, touched up her lips and face. So why is this quote about men and women? Well, it kind of shows you what is expected of women in this traditional marriage. They're expected to look beautiful and focus on their attractiveness and their outward appearance, kind of more than anything else. So again, we've got a real message here about women and the expectations about them. And then at the end of the story, we've got Jack Noonan asked if she wouldn't rather go somewhere else, to her sister's house perhaps, or to his own wife who would take care of her. And get the weapon and you've got the man. So these are both talking about the police at the end of the text. Now, Mr. Palmer didn't go through these in much detail. These were kind of challenge quotes in lesson 2. So I'm going to be asking you to write and choose one of these quotes to write about today in part 2. So it's worth just going through these quotes in a little bit more detail, but we'll do that later in the lesson. Okay, so just before we have a look at my waggle, worth saying, look again how I've structured my quotes into 3 parts, the beginning, the middle and the end. And as Mr. Palmer was saying last week, when we're answering a question about writer's aims, talking about the beginning, the middle and the end of the text is quite a good way to do it. But whereas last week you were talking about the character at the beginning, the middle and the end, this time we're going to talk about the role of women and men and gender at the beginning and the middle and the end. How is gender shown at the beginning? How is it shown in the middle? How is it shown at the end? In 3 paragraphs. And that is quite a typical essay structure to use as you move up into year 9, year 10, year 11, and thinking about exams. You'll see that we tend to use that kind of structure for writing about any question really about the writer's aims. So I've written the first paragraph for you today to have a look at. And just a reminder about the question, how does Roald Dahl present gender in the story Lamb to the Slaughter? So I'm going to read you my first paragraph of this answer, and then we're going to break it down a little bit and look at what I've included. So, at the start of Lamb to the Slaughter, Roald Dahl criticises the traditional roles that women are sometimes expected to fulfil as being like servants to their husbands. For example, when her husband returns from work, Mary immediately tends to his every need as she took his coat and hung it in the closet. Then she walked over and made the drinks. This shows that it is Mary's normal routine to care for her husband without any expectation that he will help with these tasks. She is the one expected to keep the house tidy and to wait on her husband. The verbs took and hung both connote obedience, which reinforces the fact that she is expected to get on with these chores without being asked or thanked. So if you want to pause the video here and have another reader, that's absolutely fine. And what we're going to do next is break it down into some different chunks. So here you can see I've just taken the paragraph from the last slide and I've colour-coded it and chunked it into 4 sections. And you should be becoming reasonably clear on what these 4 sections are by now. Mr. Palmer did this in the video last week as well. So just a quick reminder of what each sentence does. So the first sentence is answering the question directly with a statement. We are giving the basis of our argument. What is Roald Dahl actually saying about gender, and in this case about women and men and marriage and what that's like? So I've said in my waggle, he's criticising the traditional roles that women are expected to fulfil. So he doesn't like the fact that Mary has to wait on her husband. He thinks that's a negative thing. My second sentence is my quotation. So remembering this quotation has to prove the first sentence. So this is really my evidence to explain why and justify why my first sentence is true. So I've got, for example, when her husband returns from work, Mary immediately tends to his every need as she took his coat and hung it in the closet. Then she walked over and made the drinks. So let's just check, does this prove then that women are kind of servants to their husbands in this story? Well, yes, it does, because she's taking his coat, she's hanging it up, she's making the drinks. So, rather than Patrick, her husband, doing these things for himself, Mary is kind of doing that for him. So yes, my quote does prove my statement. As in my third sentence. So my third sentence is where we explain what we can infer, what we think the quote hints at, what we as readers can get from the quote that's maybe not explicitly said. And remembering it always has to answer the question and go into more depth on answering that question about how do we see gender in the story. So let's have a look. This shows that it's Mary's normal routine to care for her husband without any expectation that he will help with these tasks. She is the one expected to keep the house tidy and to wait on her husband. So have I said what I can infer? Yes, I have. I can infer that it's her routine to care. I can infer that there's no expectation that he'll help, shown by the fact that she's doing it all. And have I linked that back to the question about gender, so men and women? Yes, I have, because I've talked about the fact that it's the woman who's expected to do these jobs. So that links very much back to my statement sentence, all about them being servants to their husbands. So I'm always building on top of my statement here. Mr. Palmer pointed this out in the last lesson, but notice how I have done this as kind of one whole sentence with a semicolon. But I could definitely make this inference section 2 sentences or maybe even 3 sentences if I wanted to break it down. So inference doesn't have to just be 1 sentence. It will probably be multiple sentences. And then my very last sentence here, I've taken one word from the quotation, discussed the connotations, and given further explanation, again, to answer the question. So let's test that out. The verbs took and hung both connote obedience, which reinforces the fact that she is expected to get on with these chores without being asked or thanked. So I've actually chosen 2 words from the quotation, which you're absolutely welcome to do. That's a bit of a stretch, I guess. They both happen to be verbs, so in this case I've been able to say the verbs took and hung. Have I explained the connotations? Yes, I've said they connote obedience, as following the rules. And have I given further explanation to answer the question? Yes, I have. It's reinforced the fact she's expected to get on with these chores without being asked or thanked. So you got a chance to pause the video now then, please, Key Stage 3. If you've managed to print this slide or the waggle, then I'd like you to make the annotations on it. If you haven't, then I'd like you just to make some notes, just as a reminder about what each section of your analytical paragraph should be doing. All right, folks, so hopefully you've got some notes written down from that slide about what you're doing in your analytical paragraph. So this is going to be the end of part 1 of the lesson here. In the second part of the lesson, on the next video, we're going to, I'm going to write paragraph 2 about the middle of the story and how gender is shown in the middle. And then you're going to write paragraph 3 about how gender, men and women, are shown at the end of the story, using those quotes that I talked about earlier that we'll have a look at in a bit more detail. So that's the end of part 1 of the video. Make sure when you're ready, you click on to part 2 so that you can carry on today's lesson.